con la conferencia número 1 que tenemos para estos 2 días, en la que nos acompaña Taddy Hall. Taddy Hall nos complace además hoy con su presencia como un experto en estrategia y en innovación, y queríamos abrir con él porque nos permite enmarcar la conversación alrededor de los elementos esenciales del crecimiento de las compañías. Él es socio senior de la práctica de innovación en Lippincott. Durante muchos años estuvo trabajando con Nielsen en los temas de innovación, justamente liderándolos, y es uno de los más reconocidos expertos en temas de innovación en el mundo. Ha asesorado un gran número de compañías y eso, además, esa asesoría los ha impulsado a crecer, mejorando sus resultados de una manera tangible. Taddy se especializa en creación de nuevas empresas, desarrollo de productos, mejora de procesos de innovación y transformación organizacional. Entonces, quiero recordarles que al final de esta conferencia vamos a realizar en redes sociales 3 preguntas. Quienes contesten correctamente las preguntas en Twitter con el numeral Crecer Camp podrán asistir a un conversatorio personalizado con Seth Siegel, cofundador de Starbucks. Quiero entonces de esta manera darle la bienvenida a Taddy Hall, coautor del libro Competing Against Luck, compitiendo contra la suerte, para que nos comparta su conocimiento alrededor de crecimiento empresarial. Bienvenido, Taddy.
Gracias. Okay. I always wanted to be a rock and roll star. Maybe as close as I get. Gracias por recibirme acá. Es un placer y un honor estar aquí con cada uno de ustedes. Por motivos de flojera y eficiencia, voy a hacer esta charla en inglés, lamentablemente, pero después, cuando estamos conversando, por favor, usa el idioma que corresponde. All right, let's get this party started. Thank you so much for having me here. This is probably a good phrase to kick this off. It's been attributed to Alan Kay and to others. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Others have said that the pace of change that we are experiencing today, that's affecting all of our businesses and all of our lives, the pace of change that we're experiencing today will never be slower. If you think about it, you don't even have to go back 10 years ago. Could you imagine that you would take your next vacation and you would stay in a stranger's house? Could you imagine that to go to your next business meeting, you would have jumped in a car with a stranger and that they would have reliably taken you to where you wanted to go? That you would get out of the car without even paying the driver? There's so many of these things that we couldn't even imagine. I think the point is that there's no way to predict the future, but we can create the future. And for those of us trying to create the future, trying to keep pace with the rate of technological change is probably impossible. Right? The pace of change is too fast. So what can we do to build successful, sustainable growth companies in the face of relentless change? And I'll give you 3 things that you can do that quite predictably will enable you to compete and win and create successful growth businesses in the face of tremendous change. Number 1, and I'm surprised how many sophisticated leaders of great companies do not have a good answer to this question. You should know why you exist in this world. You should be able to write down a story that my 7-year-old would understand of your customer in the circumstances in which they're trying to make progress in their personal or professional lives, and you should be able to describe that progress without you in the story. You're not the star. The customer is the star. And you should be able to tell that story and say, we exist in this world to enable that person to make the progress that they seek and create the experiences that they desire. You should be able to tell that story, and you should have a firm grasp on that story. That's why you exist in the world. You should have a very loose grip on how you fulfill that mission. You should have firm focus on why you exist and a loose grip on the tools and business models and technologies by which you fulfill that mission. And the third point is you should master proven principles for innovation and growth that can dramatically de-risk your innovation process. Because I'll tell you what, the fruits of innovation are not evenly distributed, right? A small percentage of companies capture an overwhelming share of growth and profits in any category. We've done a lot of research in consumer packaged goods for a variety of reasons. One is that it's got tremendous activity of new product launches, lots of launches, uh, lots of failures, a few successes. So it gives you the ability to study successes and failures. And let me tell you a little bit. We've done this study around the world, but I'll tell you some data from the United States that underscores this point. In the last 5 years, there have been $35 billion of new growth, of category expansion in consumer packaged goods. $35 billion. And how much of that $35 billion do you think was captured by the 25 largest multinational firms? What was this? These are the biggest companies in the world with the smartest people and the biggest brands and the most powerful distribution networks. These are companies like Nestle and Unilever and Coke and Pepsi and Procter and Gamble. How much of that 35 billion did they capture? Effectively zero. Isn't that staggering? Almost all the growth was captured by small companies, not even the top 100. The companies that are driving growth are pursuing strategies of market creating innovation. The overwhelming majority of leaders of large enterprises are focused on market share and pursue strategies that are inherently focused on share shifting. I'm going to steal a piece of your pie and try and defend it rather than to grow the pie. There's an inherent belief that that innovation is kind of a game of chance. That it's risky and it's uncertain, it's hazardous. You've got to take bold leaps of faith. In many ways, this was the question that led us to write the book that Clay Christensen and I and a couple colleagues released last year. But I carried this question around with me around the world, and I would visit managers of large companies and small companies, and I would say, okay, guys, so we're in the job of innovation. We've got to do innovation. And by the way, innovation, the way I define innovation is a new offering that enables people to make desired progress and create desired experiences. Successful innovations enable progress. They don't do something more surreal or sophisticated or sexy than that. Innovations enable progress. But I would ask executives, so if we're responsible for creating these new growth businesses, boy, we should know what causes success, or else our odds of success are pretty low. And what was interesting to me wasn't the diversity of answers. It's not like everybody had a different answer. What was striking to me was how few leaders had actually thought about this question. And the reason I think people don't think about what causes success is that at some level in their minds, they just believe and assume hey, this is innovation. It's risky. There is no cause. It's kind of a game of chance. You do your best, you place some bets, and you hope for good outcomes, right? The point is that if you believe it to be true, you end up building processes that make it true, and you build risk and failure into your process. So this is a very self-promotional slide, isn't it? Um, let's skip it. But the work that we've done, uh, that I've done in the field working with companies, and that Clay Christensen and I've done at Harvard Business School. I've worked closely with Clay for 20 years, but the work that we've done has been largely motivated by this pursuit of, is there a better way to pursue innovation, or is it just inherently a risky, hazardous endeavor? Is there an alternative to the way that most firms build and pursue their innovation processes, which are based on correlations, right? Most of my clients go out into the world and they scoop up vast troves of data, and then they disaggregate that data to stuff it into spreadsheets, and they say, okay, so there's this fellow named Taddy Hall, and he's 50 years old and father of 2 daughters, and he lives in the suburbs of New York, and he drives a really old piece of junk car for some reason, and they take all these characteristics of me, and then they decide, we think this fellow's going to buy a New York Times instead of a New York Post today. Now, I might buy a New York Times or I might not, but none of those characteristics about me, my age, where I live, the car I drive, what I had for breakfast, none of those things are predictive. None of those things explain why I might buy the New York Times or the Post. They might describe me, but what we do in marketing is we typically build models based on correlation. And the reason that we do that is because we think that causality isn't knowable. That assumption is wrong. We do know what causes people to pull the products and services into their personal, professional lives that they do. The name of our book is Competing Against Luck. Does anybody unsure? Is the title of the book confusing? I think it's intentionally confusing, actually. But Clay came up with it, so we all liked it. But does that title confuse anybody? Competing Against Luck? Does anybody sort of wonder what that means? Yeah, we call those like T-Rex hands at business school, right? They're not really raising their hand. They're kind of like, yeah. The point is that most firms have built failure into their process. Edward Deming, who was the father of the quality movement, taught us that every process is perfectly designed. Every process is perfectly designed to produce the outputs that it produces. And most of us in our innovation work, we have built failure and waste and defects into the process, just as manufacturers did before the quality revolution. There's actually a perfect parallel there that we've written quite a bit about. But the basis of our work essentially is offering managers a choice in their innovation work. You don't need to base your innovation resource decisions on luck or chance. You can compete against luck by leaving luck to others. And you can compete against them as they use luck as their strategy for innovation if you base your innovation strategies on some proven principles. So let's look at how does this translate into the real world? I've been talking at a high level. Let's make this real. We did a lot of the core research on jobs theory in the consumer packaged goods industry. Why? For a couple of reasons. One is we had access to lots of data, success and failure. And that's important because almost all of the work that's been done on innovation has simply been studies of success and then extrapolations from those successes and saying, aha, well, these guys did these 7 or 8 things and they were really successful. You should do those 7 or 8 things too. If doctors did that, they would be kicked out of the profession, right? But in management, somehow we get away with that. So the reason we looked at data in this industry is we had lots of sample success and failure. The other is it's really hard to tease out causal drivers in consumer packaged goods because the emotional engagement is quite low compared to, say, buying a phone or a computer, or even, as we wrote about in the book, buying a mattress at Costco. There's much more emotion involved in buying a mattress than there is in potato chips, at least for most people. Some people are probably passionate about their potato chips. Actually, I know they are because I've done a lot of work in potato chips. But the point is, I'm showing you these images not necessarily because you'll recognize all of them, but you can probably recognize at least that it kind of looks like a cross section of the store. And these were some of the very most successful products launched in the last 5 years in the United States. Their average first year sales were 100 times the sales levels of their less successful peers. And if you look at them, it's frozen dinners and cat food and cat litter and dog treats and sodas and candies. It looks like a cross section of the store. So the point is that if there is some common connective tissue that actually explains why these products were so successful, if there is some common connective tissue and a causal mechanism that explains why people hired these products and pulled them into their lives, if such a common trait exists, it is not obvious, right? It's not obvious. In fact, if you look at this, you kind of feel comfortable, like, yeah, that's got to be random chance, right? In fact, I struggled with what we found. And so I often talk about some of the very specific innovations I rejected when I first saw them and saying, that can't be innovation. I'm a guru. I know what innovation is, right? And I would dismiss wildly successful products because for some reason they didn't fit with my biases as to what innovation would look like. The truth of the matter is, every single one of these successful innovations have at their core a simple, compelling story of a person in a place trying to make progress in their personal or professional lives, create some desired experience, and along that journey, they encounter frustrations and struggles and trade-offs. And these successful products have identified those circumstances of struggle, and they've designed a product that perfectly fits into that circumstance to enable that desired progress. Every single one of those pictures, those brands that I showed you, have at their core a simple, compelling story. Even this one, sliced cheese. Not just any sliced cheese. This cheese is sliced ultra thin. Now, this was on the list of wildly successful products that I rejected out of hand as fitting our definitions of what a breakthrough definition was. Does anybody else struggle to think of this or see this as a transformational innovation? Does anybody else with me that this is a little bit of a stretch? Okay, I have some company. Through the product mindset, this is packaged cheese. What's the big deal? Well, the reality is, I'll talk a little bit about my friends at Sargento, which is a wonderful family-owned company up in northern Wisconsin. And they spent a lot of time with their customers, and they would talk to these customers about Tell us about when you're making your sandwiches every day. We want to understand that sandwich making experience. And they heard some funny stories. And the stories kind of went like this. Let me tell you, I make a sandwich for myself every day and I take it to work. And I love the cheese, you know, because I have sandwich every day, but I can use a different kind of cheese. And the cheese gives it like the variety and the texture and that spike of flavor that I love. The cheese is the difference maker. But I got to tell you, I'm trying to be a little bit healthier and I'm not crazy about the fat and the calories that the cheese brings. So if you want me to be honest with you, I'll tell you what I do. I do some kind of funky things. Some days what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'll have the cheese, but I'll skip the chips. But I really like having chips with the sandwich because the crunchy salty goes really well, and the textures, and I like having both, and that way it really feels like lunch, not just a snack. So I like having the chips, but sometimes I don't have the chips. Other days what I'll do is I'll take the cheese and I'll rip it up into little pieces. So I'll make little cheese dots. So I use a little less cheese, but I'll tell you, sometimes the cheese falls out and then I get a bite with no cheese or not enough cheese, and it doesn't really have the same texture if do that, and that's not such a great so sometimes what I'll do is I say, okay, today I'm going to have the cheese and the chips, but tomorrow, you watch me, tomorrow I'm going to be good, no cheese. And then it's tomorrow, and it's like 6 in the morning, and it's just me in the kitchen, and it's dark, and I'm making my sandwich, and I'm trying to pretend that I don't remember that I'm not supposed to have cheese, but I do remember that I'm not supposed to have cheese, and so there it is. I'm having this argument with myself about you're not supposed to have the cheese, but I want the cheese. It drives me nuts. And so to be honest with you, I'm just having fewer sandwiches. Anyhow, it's an amazing story. It's this crazy, intense story of a poor fellow suffering to make a sandwich to take to work each day. But the point is that every single one of these successful innovations have at its core a story like that. In the most mundane of products, they have a story of a circumstance of struggle. This is wildly successful. The number of new products, the percentage of new products that sell $50 million in their first year in the US market is about 3%. This is easily in the top 1% of all new products launched in the consumer packaged goods industry. And not only did it launch successfully, it grew aggressively, and it dramatically expanded the category as well because it was pulling in people who weren't buying a processed cheese, packaged cheese beforehand. I'll just do one more of these. Anybody have a cat? Do you consider yourself a cat owner or a cat parent? There's a difference, yeah. Don't you have a cat? Are you a cat parent or owner? It's a big difference. I'm a cat owner. Parent. You know what the difference is? So I'm a cat owner. I don't care what the cat wants. I mean, I like the cats are fine. My daughters like the cat. I put up with the cat. I bought the cat. But but if you're a cat parent, you actually want connection with the cat. I want the cat away. But if you want connection with the cat, now let me say, this is interesting. So I work with lots of big companies in the pet food industry. Procter and Gamble, which they got out of it. Mars, Nestle. These are big, sophisticated companies. Lots of resources. How is the cat food industry structured? There's two kinds. There's wet and there's dry. Everything that gets done in the world of cat food is either wet or dry. But my buddy Jeff Tanner, who ran Big Heart Big Heart Pet, spent some time with cat parents, and you know what he found? He got down at cat parent level with the cat, and what he found was in that circumstance of the cat parent feeding that cat, what kind of food do I feed my cat, wet or dry? Dry, of course. Why? No mess, no smell, no fuss. Now, cat people would tell me that my cat would rather have wet. That's not true because my cat's never had wet, so it doesn't know to want wet. But cats prefer wet. I guess it tastes better. Never eaten cat food. But owners prefer dry. And so what Jeff and his team found is when they got down there at ground level, there was a lot of energy of like, oh man, I want the cat to be happy. I want to give it wet, but I want to give it dry. And there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of energy. And that granular insight gave Jeff and his team this inspiration of what if we could create a cat food that had all the properties of dry, right? No smell, no mess, no fuss, but had that kind of moist disgustingness on the inside that the cats like. That's a big idea. It was a really hard thing to do from an engineering standpoint. In fact, Jeff and I did an interview. It was on the front page of the business section of the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the main paper out in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And the essence of the interview was to highlight the incredible technology innovation that was going on outside of Silicon Valley. But that's the point, is that all of us as managers, let's set cat food aside for a minute, as managers, we see the world through the lens of our existing economics and our existing business model. And when we do that, we are divorcing ourselves from the view of reality that our customers bring to their daily lives. Successful innovators teach themselves to see the world through the lens of the customer, not through the lens of their existing economics and their established business models and the category structures that industries would impose on them. That's how Jeff Tanner and his team created Meow Mix Tender Centers. It was a huge success. This isn't just about packaged goods. This is not just about cat food or sliced cheese. In fact, those are some of the hardest industries in which to tease out these insights. This is our good friend Scott Cook. Scott started Intuit, the software company. He loves to tell the story about the early days of their discovering the way that customers were actually using what became their QuickBooks small business software. They actually designed this product for personal use, just to use at home to keep track of your checks and stuff. And for 2 to 3 years, Scott and his team were ignoring the reality they knew about, that people were using this at work, and they just dismissed it. When they finally bothered to go and figure out what people were doing with the software, what he found was these people were not doing their personal finances. These were small business owners, and the last thing in the world that they wanted was accounting software. They didn't understand credits and debits or double entry bookkeeping, and they sure as hell didn't want to learn. Accounting language and software made them feel stupid. It scared them. All they wanted to do was they wanted to build their business, and they didn't want to run out of cash. They want to have simple tools to collect their receivables and pay their bills and pay their employees. But the last thing they wanted was accounting software. And once Scott and his team realized it, as Scott said, we relaunched our product with half the functionality at twice the price of the competitors. And in 18 months, we owned the market. That's what you can do when you take a jobs to be done lens to innovation and to discovering innovation opportunities. You seek out the progress that people are trying to make in their personal and professional lives. You identify the struggles and trade-offs
that they experience, and you design a product that perfectly delivers the progress and experiences that they are seeking. This is not natural. My wonderful partner here in the years that I've been working in Colombia, Eduardo Salazar of Upside, we were having dinner last night, and he made the observation, and this is true, that jobs theory, which I'm going to be talking a little bit more about and describing more formally in a minute, we said it's deceptively complex, meaning at the surface level, it's very intuitive. You don't have to learn a new language. It's all plain English or plain Spanish. It describes the circumstances of very real people. But translating these insights into organizational behaviors and processes is not easy. And for most organizations, it's not natural. It requires us to behave differently. It requires us even harder. It requires us to think differently. Human beings do not like to change the way that we think. That's not how we're wired. When we make that circumstance, the circumstance of a customer struggling to make progress in their lives, when we make the circumstance the essential unit of our innovation work, some amazing things happen. One thing that happens is that we realize that customers pull our products into their lives in order to make progress in their lives, and we can much more productively view our products as services. Services that enable progress and create experiences. When we see our products as services, we see them in ways that are much closer to the way that our customers actually experience our products in their lives. All products can more productively be thought of as services. That's really important, and that's a big shift. What progress does our product enable? What experiences does our product create? The second thing that happens, no matter how revolutionary our offering may be, we are not creating a new dimension of reality. Not happening. So some pre-existing behavior in that circumstance must exist. And therefore, something has to get fired in order for us to get hired. That could be a product that does the job poorly. It could be some combination of products that people kludge together. Or, best of all, for innovators, it could be some non-consuming compensating behavior, right? I don't even buy cheese because I hate having those arguments with myself. I do something else, right? Non-consumption is innovators' gold. But the point is that if we're creating and introducing a new product, a new offering into the world, we should know what is going to get fired, and we should know why. We should know the criteria that the customer uses in that circumstance to weigh options and make trade-offs and pursue the choices that they ultimately pursue. We should have access to that value code. The other thing that happens when we immerse ourselves in the circumstance of struggle of a person in a place trying to make progress is the dimensions of benefit that are relevant and those dimensions of benefit that are irrelevant in that job get amazingly clear. Jobs theory enables us to create design specs for our products that serve our organizations as a language, provides a language for collaboration. It provides a mechanism for integration across different functional areas. A client of mine at Kraft Foods had worked on a very successful product launch using jobs theory, and he reflected back on it. And it was a wildly transformational new product they launched. He looked back on the development period of that product, and he said, Jeff said, you know, it's amazing how many meetings we did not have to have. I often tell my clients that meetings are an alternative to doing work. Most meetings are a waste of time. In the context of innovation, we have way too many meetings, and the reason for many of those meetings is we don't actually know what job we are performing with this new launch, and so we have all kinds of debates that really don't have a right or a wrong because we actually don't know what we're solving for. That was the first exercise that I recommended, is we should all write down and we should know why we exist in the world. The fourth thing that happens when we embrace this notion of the circumstances, the essential unit of innovation work, is that this notion of category boundaries. Right? I'm in the dog food business. I'm in the accounting software business. We had a wonderful description of, I'm in the financial services business, therefore I have banking products. And the point was, no, we don't have banking products. We enable progress for small businesses to make important progress in their growth ambitions. That's a very different frame of reference, right? When it's 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon and you guys are all falling asleep, but there's still program going on, you got a bunch of options. You could have a soda, a candy bar, an energy bar. You could go for a walk. You could talk to a friend. You could take a nap. You could go to the gym. That's the category. All those things compete. In that circumstance, you could hire any of those things to wake yourself up and have the energy to go through the day. And so when we see the world through the narrow lens of, oh, I'm in the business of these particular artifacts or product attributes, we fail to see the world through the lenses that customers use, which are all the different ways that they might make progress in a given circumstance. What are customers actually trying to do? We need to think a lot less about the product characteristics and our own artifacts and deeply understand what are the jobs that individual people are trying to perform in their lives. How do we do this? This kind of makes sense what he's saying. How do we do this? As managers, we are apt to come up with any number of definitions of innovation. But as I think as some of these stories reveal that I've already shared with you, customers really just use one definition, right? Meaningful innovations to me are innovations that allow me to resolve some struggle in my life and fulfill some unmet aspiration that I have. That's what successful innovations do. It's not more exotic than that. But as I said a minute ago, this isn't natural or normal for most organizations. When we set out on our innovation journeys, we typically hire guides to lead us on our way that prove to be unreliable. We hire a guide who's well versed in product attributes, and we approach the world of innovation through technology changes, or how can I tweak different dimensions of my product benefit or my service offering. We might hire a guide that knows a lot about customer characteristics and the demographics and psychographics of different groups. We might look at the trends that are emerging in the landscape of the world and say, aha, gluten-free cookies are big or high protein. Let's do a gluten, right? Or we might look at what competitors are doing and say, aha, this fellow over here launched a cereal bar that's doing really well. Let's launch a cereal bar just like his cereal bar. The point is that all of these guides, they all have useful information to offer us. Of course we should know what the trends are. Of course we should know what our competitors are doing. But none of these sources of information reveal to us the value code. The value code that individual customers apply in those specific circumstances when they are struggling to make progress in their professional lives or in their personal lives. It's only in that circumstance, that specific circumstance, which takes the shape of a story. Stories are the shape that innovation insights take. And it's only when we have access to that circumstance that we deeply understand the progress that a person is trying to make, and therefore can confidently create new products and services that enable that progress and will succeed predictably in the marketplace. At a more abstract level, what does this look like? What do we do when we're doing jobs work? We deeply understand the circumstance. We immerse ourselves in these singular sample size of one stories. Who and where and when is this struggle happening? What is the desired progress? What are the barriers and trade-offs that this person is experiencing on that way to progress? And what are their compensating behaviors to deal with this struggle? And then we can unpack it, because it isn't just functional. I do a lot of work actually with technology companies in Silicon Valley, and they're brilliant people, amazing engineers, but it never ceases to amaze me how consistently many of these software companies reduce the understanding of their products to engineering and performance attributes and economics, when the reality of their sale and the reality of the value that they create in the world often is largely emotional. How does this make people feel? Does it relieve anxiety? Does it relieve their stress? Does it make them feel competent and smart? Or social? I don't want to use something. Everybody's going to think I'm like using the wrong app or on the wrong platform, or what if this doesn't work? We need to understand these circumstances, not just through the functional dimensions of the struggle, but the very powerful emotional and social dimensions that are often much, much stronger, much, much more important than simply the functional dimensions of struggle. This is how we unpack the layers of meaning that are resident in these narrative structures of consumer and customer circumstances. When we do unlock these stories, they can be commercially transformational. We can see things that were previously hidden to us, just like Jeff Tanner and the Meow Mix Tender Centers. We can see things that none of our competitors see. This theory of jobs allows us to look at phenomenon that we have looked at many, many times before, but to see things that we've never noticed. And because of that, we are able to create products and services that transform markets and drive growth. And we're able to communicate with our customers in ways that speak to their struggles and their ambitions and their aspirations and desired progress. One of the people we spoke to in this book was Pleasant Rowland, who started American Girl Doll. And I was very excited to do this because she has personally fleeced me for untold thousands of dollars. Has anybody else been victimized by American Girl Doll? Yes, we have. Mercifully, not many of you seem to own or operate young daughters. But you don't need to know the story to appreciate her genius, which is she went out to buy a doll for her niece and was struck by the poverty of the offerings of this kind of hypersexed Barbie or this kind of silly Cabbage Patch doll. And she's like, why am I buying a doll in the first place? And she thought deeply about what she was trying to do. And what she was really trying to do was to create some kind of a mechanism so that she and her sister and their mother could connect with their daughter and niece and granddaughter, connect across generations and share stories, create meaning, transmit values. It was all about connections. And what Pleasant said, it was never about the stuff. We were never in the doll business. We were always in the story business. And it became an incredible empire that she ultimately sold for $700 million and was the most profitable division of Mattel, generating 5% of their sales and nearly 25% of their profits. The amazing thing about that story of American Girl Doll to me, the biggest surprise was that when we spoke to Pleasant Rowland, for those of you who don't know,
There are dolls, there are books, there are movies, there was a Broadway musical, there are salons where you can get your doll's hair done and your hair done. There are cafes and boutiques. You get matching pajamas and outfits. It goes on and on and on. Hold on to your wallets, fathers. But what's amazing to me is I'd always assumed that she had an idea for a doll. And once the doll was successful, she found all these other things that she could add on to it. That wasn't the case. In one snowy weekend in her Wisconsin cabin, Pleasant Rowland sat down and wrote the entire story for every single one of those elements of the business because it never was a doll business. It was all about what are all the different elements that we can create that will allow moms and grandmothers to connect with their daughters and grandmothers and forge important connections, create meaning and memory, and share values. That's powerful stuff and very, very difficult to compete against. I won't go into this story in depth, but in many ways, it's one of my favorite in the book. Southern New Hampshire University is a second tier at best university, kind of a sleepy New England college. They had a tiny little online education business that was floundering along. The whole university wasn't doing particularly well. The president of the university, Paul LeBlanc, came down to Harvard and attended a jobs innovation workshop that some colleagues of mine were leading. And a light went on, and he said, "Oh my goodness, we have no idea what people are hiring us to do." And they were treating all applicants and all students the same because they were all essentially buying college education and college degrees. But what he realized once he immersed himself in the experiences of the actual students is they had these 18-year-old kids who were kind of looking for this coming of age on campus experience, and that their job to be done was wildly different than these later in life learners, people who had never gotten a college degree when they were younger, had never been able to complete their work. Life had just gotten ahead of them, and they were in the military, or they were single moms or single dads, and they had never had the time or the money to get a college degree, and they wanted it. They wanted it for their sons, they wanted it for themselves, they wanted it for their parents, but they basically felt like it was going to be impossible, and they were largely neglected. But when Paul and his team realized that they were not, if you look at the product mindset, that their business was not about building curriculums and recruiting faculty and marketing different degrees and packaging it in the right way. Once he realized that these late life learners who felt alone and lost and very low likelihood that they would actually be able to make the progress they were seeking, he realized that they had completely failed these people. And that these people would come online late at night looking for information. And their typical response when someone said, "Hey, I'm interested in your program," is they would send them out an information package that might get to them a couple weeks later. Once Paul and his team deeply understood the nature and the circumstance of these inquiries, they built a process where if you said you were interested in adult education online, they would call you on the phone within 8 minutes if you were interested in having a conversation. Rather than resolving questions about whether you could get financial aid or whether the credits that you earned 10 years ago would transfer, rather than that taking weeks, Paul and his team would figure that out for you in a matter of days. The point is that they not only they transform the product offerings, but when you apply this theory to the products you create and the services you build, it changes dramatically your internal organizational processes as well. This is hugely important The application and implementation of jobs theory, it's not just surface level cosmetic changes. It's not just changes or tweaks to your product offerings or menu. Meaningful differentiation as a business does not occur at the level of your artifacts and products and service attributes. Meaningful differentiation occurs at the level of the process. How do you organize yourselves to uniquely deliver value and enable progress in people's lives? The processes that Paul and his team had to build to get somebody on the phone in 8 minutes, to figure out if they could transfer their credits, to figure out the financial aid issues of people very quickly. Those were complicated and hard to copy. This looks a lot like the manufacturing revolution. When the engineers of Ford went to Japan to visit Toyota City in 1985 to try and understand how in the world is Toyota making better cars in half the time at half the cost. You know what they found? They found really clean factories. So what did they do? They launched clean factory initiatives, completely failing to understand that the reason that Toyota had clean factories is that they had processes that didn't generate scrap and defects and waste, so they didn't need all the extra inventory and inspectors and rework stations around the plant. The real value in what Toyota's production system was in their processes of production, not in the attributes of a clean plant. The power of jobs theory is not in the tweaks you might make to particular offerings, but in the way that you develop processes that are hard for competitors to copy, that uniquely deliver value because they enable progress and experiences that other firms are not able to replicate. The powerful truth of our work is that much better innovation outcomes are a matter of choice. Innovation is not inherently a game of chance or risk. We can leave competing against luck to our competitors, and we can create powerful growth engines for the future if we apply these proven theories. Nobody thinks this slide is particularly funny except for me, but I continue to use it. We continue to practice innovation as if we don't know what causes it. Like the medieval experimenters before Bernoulli, we strap feathers on our arms and we jump off cathedrals because most of the things that fly seem to have feathers, and so we do that hoping that we will fly, and it never ends well. Believe me, I've never done it either. Fortunately, Bernoulli came along and said, no, stop that. It's not the feathers. What happens when air passes over a foil, it creates a pressure differential, and that property that we can call lift allows things to fly. It's not the feathers. And once we have that causal understanding, we can do amazing things like build airplanes. We have this level of understanding and knowledge available to us in innovation, but we still practice innovation largely as if we do not understand its causes. As leaders, we cannot delegate this task. If there are folks out here in large companies, this is probably more of a challenge for you than it is for folks in small companies. Too often in large companies, we see senior leaders say, yep, we've got to create the future, and they'll form a little team over here to go do it, but they'll basically neglect it. And those pet projects or those incubators or those small-scale experiments never get the resources or the support that are required to actually transform the core businesses. If you are serious about category creating innovation and about transformation and you are a senior leader, that's not a responsibility that you can delegate. You need to own that responsibility. It never gets easier. If I can say a final story back to that first quote, that Alan Kay quote, about the best way to predict the future is to create it. There is not a group of people or a place or a country that has done more radical transformation in a short period of time than Colombia. When I first came here, it was the year 2000. The first time I got picked up at the Medellin airport up in the hills, I got in the car naively, and the driver said, I think it's probably best if you lie on the floor in the back, and I'm just going to put this jacket over you just to be safe. It's like, this isn't kind of normal for what we do in New York, but okay. I was staying at a hotel in Bogota. I wanted to go for a run, and they said, no problem. And they put me in a car and took me out to the airport where they had a barbed wire fenced in area with armed guards and say, you run in there and then we'll drive you back. I was in a hotel once and I wanted to go across the street because I could see a Baskin Robbins over there. And I'm a bit of an ice cream addict. I said, I want to get an ice cream. And they said, you may not get an ice cream. There's a general strike. You need to stay in your room. And by the way, stay away from the windows. Nobody in their right minds would have predicted the transformation and change and innovation that has occurred right here over the last 15 years. And there's no reason to stop now. You guys have all the tools that are necessary to build amazing companies and create a future that we can only imagine. The tools at our hands, and I'm excited to be here with all of you for today, and I hope the next 2 days are powerfully transformational. Thank you guys very much.
Do you have translation? No, they will
No, lo
translate
hace.
us. It's okay.
Hazlo, está bien.
So, first of all, thank you. This has been very enlightening to all of us.
Thank
And
you.
I would like to share with you 2 questions that we received through the app from the audience. The first one from Jaime Contreras Latorre is about failure.
Failure.
So he's asking, failure is high in organizations. Why isn't that more analyzed? And I would like to add to that, how can we better use failure to learn from it
Yeah.
and move forward?
So the failure, the question is really about failure and how to use failure and embrace failure. There are definitely some, I'll try and be brief, but there are myths about failure and risk in the context of innovation. This idea that great, successful innovators are big risk takers, that's absolutely false, right? Most successful innovators are actually quite risk averse, and they systematically look for ways to engineer risk out of their new business initiatives, not just take wild leaps of faith. How do they do that? Back to this question. We do that through lots of experiments early on in the process. Experiments that are not designed to succeed. They're designed to teach us. They're designed to help us learn. And so the failure that we need are failures that are fast, valuable in what they teach us, and inexpensive. And successful innovators seek and embrace failure in those 3 ways. Early in the process, fast, smart, and inexpensive experiments. So I see it a lot less about embracing risk and embracing failure and more about how do we learn what we need to learn fast, inexpensively, so then we can scale with confidence. And the last thing I'll say is something that we typically don't do in the innovation business, but is fundamental to total quality movement or Six Sigma manufacturing, are postmortems. Most new product developments in sort of the manufacturing world begin with a postmortem of a previous initiative to understand what did we do well, what went wrong in prior launches. And generally in the innovation world, we don't do postmortems. And a lot of the client work that I do, we do postmortems. before we start a new initiative, we'll say, let's look at 2 or 3 of our last new product or new business initiatives, maybe a successful one and an unsuccessful one, and let's get into the minute detail of what actually happened and figure it out. Hey, what did we do well? What did we do not so well? We need to be better students of our own experience, and rigorous postmortems is an important part of that process.
Well, the second question from Jaime Pavón Celis is about the process of innovation. And what he wants to know is everything pre-calculated? Can you really know in advance how the process is going to go? And is everything measured in it?
No, and hopefully the answer to the prior question is revealing on that. Is we don't know. We don't know. What we can know in advance, if you will, or what we can discover empirically, is we can unpack the circumstances of struggle in customers' lives. Customers will never or rarely be able to tell us like what they want, but customers are profoundly articulate about their current struggles and their current behaviors. And so it's by struggling their behaviors that then we as innovators can take on the responsibility of saying, I understand the progress you're trying to make, the experience you're trying to create, and then we can start prototyping and experimenting and testing and learning to figure out what the perfect solution to that job to be done is. But no, we don't have crystal balls allow us to see the future. What we have is our set of tools and highly predictive theories that allow us to pursue the messy uncertainty of innovation with approaches that we can confidently apply to create a future that will be successful. But it's not like following a recipe for a cake or something. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Un aplauso para Taddy.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.